Okay, my name is Douglas Lummis. I'm here representing the Ryukyus Okinawa Chapter of Veterans for Peace, as we call it, VFP-ROCK. And I'd like to introduce my two friends, both of whom live in the city of Nago in northern Okinawa, the same city where the Japanese and U.S. governments are trying to build a new U.S. base. Keiko YONAHA-san and Hideki Yoshikawa-san. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Okay. I'm Keiko YONAHA. I was born in Okinawa and I have been teaching English at University of Okinawa.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to introduce a brief history of Okinawa today. I'm very happy to participate in this project. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Hideki Yoshikawa, and I'm a native Okinawan, and I'm excited to be participating in this session. And I'm the international director of the Okinawa Environmental Justice Project, which deals with the environmental issues in relation to U.S. military bases.
This webinar will have three parts. Yonaha-san will give a brief history of recent Okinawan events, and Yoshikawa-san I will ask some frequently asked questions, and he will answer them while we look at some pictures. So, would you like to begin?
Okay. Let me introduce a brief history of Okinawa. I put the title as Islands Seeking for Peace. Okinawa is about 4,800 miles away from Hawaii. It's an 8-hour flight. Okinawa consists of 160 large and small islands, including 49 inhabited islands over a vast ocean area. And Okinawa was called the Ryukyus from the 14th century to 1879. Thereafter, it was incorporated to Japan and referred to as Okinawa. As you see, it is made of several larger islands of Okinawa, Miyako, Yaeyama, including Yonaguni and others. Today, Ryukyu Islands refer to the whole chain of islands and not just the main island of Okinawa. Okinawa main island is the largest among them, which spans about 70 miles from north to south. This is a brief history of Okinawa from ancient times to 15th century. Early human remains discovered dating back to 32,000 years ago. 300 BC, development of villages. 900 to 1314, international trade with neighboring countries in Asia. 1429, unification of Ryukyu Kingdom at Shuri Castle. 15th to 16th century is called Golden Age. In 1816, the British ship Lyra, returning from a visit to East Asia, made a brief stop at St. Helena. There, Captain Basil Hall and the other officers were introduced to Napoleon, who was imprisoned there. They described the various countries they had visited, and he was especially interested in the kingdom of the Ryukyus. But when he learned that the Ryukyu people had no weapons, he was upset. Without arms, how do they fight? Hall replied that they do not. As far as he knew, they had not had any wars. Napoleon again cried out, "No wars!" Clearly, he didn't believe it. But it was true, or largely true. It was in the 15th century that King Shoshin had ordered all swords collected and deposited at Shuri Castle. So, when Captain Hall visited, they had enjoyed 4 centuries of peace as Ryukyu Kingdom, flourished by the trade with China and Southeast Asian countries. But this was soon to end. It was in 1591 Thus Toyotomi Hideyoshi then, the top of Japan, ordered Satsuma, now Kagoshima Prefecture, and Ryukyu to prepare their soldiers for Korea invasion and threatened if Ryukyu didn't follow it, it would be Ryukyu to be conquered. However, Ryukyu didn't prepare soldiers and instead provided the food, but just half of what was requested. Satsuma, aiming to get the benefit of Ryukyu's trade with China, invaded into Ryukyu with the permission of the top of Japan and conquered it 1609. Ryukyu Kingdom becomes dependency. In 1879, Japan's new Meiji government, in imitation of the West great powers, began to build an empire. The first step was to annex the Ryukyu Kingdom and reorganize it as Okinawa Prefecture. The Ryukyus appears to China for help, didn't get it, but still refused to accept Japan's demands. Especially they could not accept Japan's stationing a military garrison in Okinawa. They argued that they had gotten along just fine with no military force and had enjoyed a century of peace. As historian George Carr put it, a military garrison established now might attract the hostile attention and action of foreign powers with which Ryukyu had no quarrel. Far from protecting the islands, a garrison would make war more likely. The Japanese ignored this argument and established a garrison there against the people's will. And of course, what the Okinawans had feared in 1879 was just what happened in 1945. By that time, the small Japanese garrison had grown into a massive military presence. In the Pacific War, to destroy the military presence in Okinawa, the U.S. staged a huge landing operation that became the Battle of Okinawa, called by the Okinawans the Steel Typhoon. The bombardment from ship and aircraft destroyed virtually every artifact of Ryukyu Okinawan culture and industry. From Shuri Castle to the people's residences, to their fields and orchards and harbors. Between a quarter and a third of Okinawan people were killed. The survivors were left homeless. Under U.S. military rule, Okinawans become stateless people. Under U.S. extraterritoriality, GIs who committed crimes against Okinawans either found not guilty or simply transferred back to the U.S. San Francisco Peace Treaty enacted April 28, 1951. Japan regained independence, but Okinawa remained under the authority of U.S. government. Celebrated in Japan as the day sovereignty was returned, remembered in Okinawa as the day Japan gifted them to the United States. Okinawa's Day of Humiliation. Having defeated the Imperial Japanese military, the U.S. began its own occupation of Okinawa. First, it took over the Japanese bases and made them its own. It started building new bases, confiscating farm and village land with the method of Okinawans vividly called bayonets and bulldozers by oppressing the resistance of residents. The present U.S. Marine Corps Air Station at Futenma was one of them. In detail, from 1945 to 1972, Okinawa was governed directly by the United States military. Okinawans had no nationality and therefore no passports. A Ryukyu government, including an elected assembly, was established, but its decision could be vetoed by the U.S. military commander. With the infrastructure destroyed in the bombardment, and with so much of the farmland turned to bases, many people had no choice but to take jobs serving the military on or off the bases. During the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Afghan War, and Iraqi War, many Okinawans felt terrible about being forced to be complicit in wars against the people with whom they had no quarrel. In this picture, Okinawans who are against U.S. military bases and Okinawans employed by the U.S. military stand facing each other, and it is clear that even though these young Okinawans were working on U.S. side, their minds are with the people who are against the U.S. military. In 1972, Okinawa returned to Japan, and people celebrated it, believing that they can enjoy peaceful life without bases. However, it was betrayed. Result, now Okinawa, 0.6% of Japanese territory, bears 70% of U.S. military facilities in Japan, up from 11% in 1953. In 1953, mainland Japan 89%, Okinawa 11%. Due to the anti-U.S. military base movement in Japan, U.S. military facilities were moved to Okinawa, which was under U.S. occupation. So, in 1972, at the time of the reversion to Japan, mainland 46% and Okinawa 54%. Even after the reversion, there was no improvement in the situation of Okinawa. On the contrary, the situation got worse. In 2017, the ratio is mainland 30% and Okinawa 70%. Also, base-related crimes and accidents are still rampant in Okinawa, and environment damages are injuring our health and our daily life. As you see here, there are many reasons why having U.S. military bases is a burden for us. Crimes, accidents, such as jet fighter crashes, and various kinds of pollutions. We briefly looked back the history of Okinawa from a political viewpoint. Let me touch upon its culture. Okinawa originated martial art, karate, which used mainly hands as weapons. It's a martial art not to attack, but to protect yourself. The characteristic lies in the spirit of an attitude to avoid a fight. Sanshin is a musical instrument. In Japan, samurai warriors decorated swords in tokonoma, an alcove, as the most precious things. In Ryukyus, samurai decorated sanshins as the most precious ones. Even in Okinawan War, it is said that some people ran from place to place with sanshins. What can we do to make the situation better in Okinawa, in Japan, and in the world? Ahagon Shoko, called Okinawan's Gandhi, quoted the words of Jesus. All they who take the sword shall perish with the sword. Then he added these words to fit the rhythm to our times. Countries with military bases invite military destruction. Countries with nuclear weapons invite nuclear destruction. This is a phrase that Okinawan people often use as a slogan for anti-war movement. It came from a word of Ryukyuan King Shotai in a Ryukyuan drama described Japan's forceful incorporation of Ryukyu in 1879. Ryukyu was forced to be incorporated into Japan, closing its history of 500 years as Ryukyu Kingdom. In the drama, to his followers, King Shotai said, "Don't cry over it. War ended, and soon we will have a peace. Life is a treasure." In Okinawan language, nuchiru takara. In English, life is a treasure. Thank you very much for listening.
Now we're going to move to the second phase of the webinar, frequently asked questions. There are certain questions that people really almost always ask about Okinawa. And the first one, question number 1, Yoshikawa-san, is what is the situation right now with the bases as a whole?
Okay, as you can see on the screen, this is the map of Okinawa Island. The bases are colored, and they occupied 15% of Okinawa's main island. Of course, they've taken the best land. And everyone in Okinawa knows these statistics. Okinawa comprises 0.6% of the Japan's territory, but it bears more than 70% of all of Japan's U.S. bases.
Okay, and then question number 2. What do you mostly want Americans to know? What's the most important thing you want Americans to know about the Okinawan bases?
Well, there are so many things, but first of all, these bases were forced upon us Okinawans by the U.S. and Japan. And Okinawa's permission has never been asked. And when Okinawa gives its opinion anyway, it is usually ignored.
Next, a lot of people ask this. Don't the bases actually protect Okinawa from China and from North Korea?
Well, in our opinions, or in my opinions, bases don't protect you from attack. They invite attack instead. We know that from our history. We have no quarrels with China or North Korea. If either country ever attacks Okinawa, it will be to destroy the U.S. bases here. And we Okinawans will become so-called the civilian casualties.
Okay, everybody turns into collateral damage.
That's right.
Yeah. But aside from the question of war, isn't this also true that Okinawa is economically dependent on the bases?
Well, that was true right after the war. Our infrastructure was smashed completely, and our best farmland was confiscated. People had to survive any way they could. That included working on military bases and for military people. But not anymore, though. Now, U.S. bases hinder Okinawa's economy. Whenever a piece of base land is returned, the income from that area just goes up, sometimes by a factor of 10 or more. Here's the, in this slide, here's what Naha City's Shintoshin section district looked like when it was a base. And what it looks like now is on the right side.
So on the left there's the base with all its lawns and open spaces, and on the right there's the present crowded business area.
Yeah, crowded, yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay, over the years, how have the Okinawans been protesting against the bases?
Again, in many ways, we've been protesting against the U.S. military bases. But public protest was not unknown in Okinawa before the World War II. There were labor unions and students' movements in the 1920s and 1930s. But the anti-base protests we have today began in the 1950s on the small island of Iejima. The U.S. military began confiscating the farmers' land there, again using the bayonets and the bulldozers. For good measure, they bulldozed and burned their farmers' homes. Well, at first, the people thought they could talk to the soldiers, for example, by appealing to their Christianity. And this is the moving picture of the protesters on the Iejima Island. The words on the poster express a Christian sentiment. It reads, "To Americans, we must fear to be punished by God. We are great friends as brothers and sisters, and God always will be watching our act. We live to do good without contradicting against God's way." But this had no result. So they carried petition to both the US military and the Ryukyuan government at that time. This also had no result. So they organized what they call a beggar's march, taking their case to every town and the village. And this developed into an all-island struggle. Next photos will show samples of some of the forms the anti-base movement has taken since then. Okay, this photo shows the gathering of a base workers union in 1969. As you can see, so many people.
That is a lot of workers gathered in one place.
Right.
Very impressive.
And in addition to making a typical labor union's demands, the union also opposed the Vietnam War at that time. And that was in spite of their base employment.
Aside from actions by unions or organized villages, have there been spontaneous actions?
Yes, there's been. In 1970, Koza City experienced Okinawa's only riot or uprising. The occasion was another military hit-and-run accident. But the local rioters were very careful, burning only cars with the US military license plates. And where possible, they spared those owned by black GIs, and that they made sure that all occupants got out before they set the car on fire. So there were no deaths, no lootings, and some people say that's proof of Okinawa's pacifism.
Yeah, I want to talk about, I want to get off the script for a minute and talk about this slide, which is also, for me, very moving. It's awfully hard to see, but this is a picture of a black GI holding his head in his hands, in one hand, and in the other hand holding a big stick that he's supposed to use to beat up, you would rather call them participants in an uprising rather than rioters, since they followed very strict rules about what to do. But you can see, in those days, there was a strong movement of black GIs, especially in Kadena Airport, some of them sympathetic with the Black Panther movement, very, very sensitive to discrimination, and very much aware that the Okinawans were being discriminated against as they were. And you can see this guy who found himself doing duty as an MP, military police. His whole body says, "I can't do it. I can't do it anymore. I quit." And he's in despair at being put into this position. It's a very historical moment, an interesting historical moment, and a great photograph, I think. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's a great photographer. And I have a friend who is black, and his father was stationed in Okinawa, and he grew up in Okinawa as well, my friend. So he talked about the experience of being discriminated against, and we often talk with each other about experience. So this picture really tells a lot to me. And also, please see these photos too. In 1989, the entire population of Onna village rose up. They wanted to stop the construction of an urban warfare training center in their village. It was also to stop the use of their sacred mountain as a live firing range. Do you know the main tactic they took to stop? Their tactic was for the whole village to sit down in the road, occupy the road, and stop the truck, as you can see in these photos.
Yeah, I understand that that big tower shown in the previous slide was built so that they could look inside the construction site and see if construction was going on. So they were actually spying.
That's
they
right.
Didn't have drones in those days.
Yeah. But amazing thing is, this tactic worked, so the construction stopped. This is where we learn that sitting works.
One of the very rare victories in modern Okinawan history.
Indeed.
And it seems to me that this picture is taken at night. So I think, as I've been told, they would sit in from like 4 o'clock in the morning to keep the trucks from coming in early. The whole village, men, women, children, everybody.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's a moving picture.
Yeah. You don't mean that it's like a movie, you mean it's moving.
Yeah, it's moving.
Yeah. Doesn't the movement call itself the All Okinawa Movement now?
Yes, it does. And this movement traces its origin to this horrible incident that took place in 1995. In that year, in 1995, 3 GIs kidnapped an elementary school girl and raped her. That infuriated all Okinawans, progressive, conservative, non-political, or whatever. And all Okinawa prefectural gathering was organized, and 85,000 people attended it. And you can see this, the photo here. And the US and the Japanese governments tried to placate this anger by saying that they would shut down this dangerous Marine Corps air station at Futenma and small portions of other existing bases. And Okinawan people had high expectations. But then the government said that they would move Futenma to Henoko in northern Okinawa, just 23 miles away. That really made people angrier still.
This photograph of these 85,000 people is recording a historical moment. This photograph became world news. I've talked to people from Europe who, when you say Okinawa, that's the only thing they know about it, because it was in the newspapers at the time. 85,000 people on this small island, and given the population, that's a huge number. Okay, now is the Henoko issue then the main issue for the anti-base movement today?
Yes, and that really makes us angry because, you know, instead of reducing Okinawa's bases, it's just building yet another one. And again, making the decision without consulting Okinawa and just insulting. And putting 70% of Japan's bases in this tiny Okinawa, I think it amounts to a form of discrimination. And building it at beautiful Henoko-Ora Bay, that just leads to environmental catastrophe.
Okay, how can we be certain that actually, though, a majority, more than 50%, more than half of Okinawans are opposed to the bases?
There are many ways we're opposing this Henoko constructions, through referendums, through elections. So few Okinawans have ever positively supported the bases, but some have been resigned and voted conservative. But in recent years, there has been a shift from resignations to resistance. In 1997, Nago City, we had a referendum on the base project, and majority opposed it. And in 2014, anti-new base Onaga Takeshi was elected as our new governor. In 2018, after Onaga died of cancer, Tamaki Deni was elected on an anti-base platform with a 63% of the vote. And last year, in 2019, we had a prefectural referendum, and the result was 72% against the base, and only 19 supported. And since then, the Okinawa has sent 2 anti-Henoko representatives to the national diet. So it tells that Okinawans do oppose the construction plan, this construction. However, after each of these elections or referendums, Japanese governments just announced to the press that these results will be ignored. That really makes us angry as well.
And the person who made the announcements each time was the person who was Chief Cabinet Secretary, Suga, who is now the Prime Minister.
Right.
So he's very accustomed to saying no to Okinawa.
That's right. So we have a big fight in front of us with Suga as our Prime Minister.
Okay, can you tell us a little more specifically what are the problems about this plan for a base?
Well, there are many specific problems, I think, with this project. First of all, I would say this area of Henoko-Ora Bay is one of the richest biodiversity areas in Japan and probably in the world, as you can see in these beautiful photos. And Henoko-Ora Bay covers only 10 square miles, but it's a habitat for some 5,300 marine species, that including 262 endangered species like the dugongs, the marine mammals, and the blue corals. And that's almost as many as the 7,000 marine species found in Hawaii's Marine National Monument, which is in size equal to like 58,000 Ora bays. So you can see this, how rich biodiversity that Henoko-Ora Bay has.
That's an incredible statistic. But is it certain that the construction will damage this habitat?
Well, the Japanese government says it won't, according to their environmental impact assessment studies. But damage has already occurred. As you can see in the photos here, mud is leaking and the coral is dying and the vital currents have been altered. And the dugongs, our cultural icons, and Japan's national monument, has been driven out from the area. But it's not only just the bay though. While carrying out this Henoko plan, the Japanese government is also constructing the 6 new helipads in the nearby Yambar forest. And amazingly, the half of that forest has been nominated for UNESCO's World Natural Heritage.
Nominated but not accepted, right?
Not accepted. Yeah, we were really worried about the presence of the training area, and also this construction of a new helipads would provide some problems for the nomination process. But anyway, the helipads themselves destroy forest land. But also this tilt rotor ospreys, also known as the widow makers, that use these helipads, damage the forest just by hovering over it. I want to show you this video. You can see this one. So these ospreys send down a powerful hot downwash that shakes animals out of trees and dries the damp greenery.
This is all very much concerning to people who care about the environment, but isn't it pretty hard to get the U.S. Congress or the U.S. Department of Defense to care at all about environmental destruction in foreign countries?
Yes, yes, but it's not impossible. For example, a group of Okinawans and Japanese and U.S. citizens filed a lawsuit against the DOD in a U.S. federal court for the protection of the Dugong, that marine mammal. It was hard-fought battle, but the court ruled that the DOD has the responsibility, and the court ordered the DOD to conduct environmental studies, and the DOD actually conducted the studies. After all, DOD and the U.S. government are legally bound to avoid such damage. But there are aspects of the project the U.S. government or DOD would see as against U.S. national interest, if only they would pay attention. For example, safety.
Okay, what are the safety issues?
Okay, for starters, there are 2 active earthquake faults beneath the construction site, as you can see in this map here. Who would want to build a base on the active fault? And also, currently sitting on this active faults is this ammunition storage facility, which allegedly housed the nuclear weapons in the 60s. It's really amazing to think about ammunition storage sitting on this active fault. And please take a look at this illustrations. This construction site violates DOD's height regulations too. This illustration shows how the DOD rules applies to the Henoko construction site. The horizontal surface line, as you can see here, that marks the maximum height allowed to any structures near the airstrip. You can see many buildings and the transmission towers exceeding that limits. And here, the towers look like wire snares designed to bring down the ospreys.
We also hear that the construction itself is running into what? Construction problems, engineering problems.
Yes, the big problem now is the sea bottom. Soil tests found beneath the airstrip site on Ora Bay a thick layer of slime. Okinawans call it mayonnaise problem because it's so fragile. The sea bottom is so fragile. So this means the Japanese government had to abandon its original construction plan. Now, before building any seawall on the Ora Bay side, they need to farm up the sea bottom. That will delay the project at least like 5 years. And the construction budget has been tripled.
5 years at least.
At least, yeah.
Can the Department of Defense, are they willing to wait that long?
We don't know. But interesting fact is that DOD wasn't told about it, this mayonnaise like the sea bottom. For at least 2 years, Japanese government kept this problem secret. I would like you to show this film clip. In the film clip, you will see Admiral Harry Harris, then Commander of U.S. Forces Pacific, and he's reporting to the Senate Armed Service Committee in 2016.
Yesterday, can you just give us an update on what more we should be looking at doing or helping our allies, particularly with regard to Japan, in terms of the Marine redeployment there?
Right. And so we have this relationship with Japan in Okinawa. We have an obligation to defend Japan, and they have an obligation to provide us a place from which to defend them. And Okinawa is one of those critical places where we must be in order to meet our treaty obligations to defend Japan. A few years ago, through a lot of increasing tensions over the years, Japan asked us to move our forces out of Futenma to someplace else. And our response to that is, sure, you build a new place and we'll move our forces there. And that's a simplistic view, but that's how we agreed to move from Futenma to the Futenma replacement facility, Camp Schwab or Henoko. And then in that process, we agreed also to relocate 8,000 to 10,000 Marines out of Okinawa. And from that, you have the Guam Peace, the Hawaii Peace, and part of the Marine rotation forces in Darwin. You have all that, which is a follow-on to once we start moving Marines from Futenma to the Futenma replacement facility. The challenge we have is to get the build done on the Futenma replacement facility, which is Japan's responsibility. That's their obligation to us. And right now it's slowed. It's about 2 years, a little over 2 years late. It was going to be done by 2023, and now we're looking at 2025 before that's done. And then that's when the big movement of Marines from Okinawa to Guam and Hawaii would take place in the 2020s. So I believe we have to continue to fly and operate out of Futenma and continue to work with the Japanese as they start to build the replacement facility at Henoko, Camp Schwab.
So as you can see in the video here, a clip. So Harris is fighting irritation and he tells the committee that Henoko project has been delayed 2 years to 2025. At the time Harris spoke, the Japanese government already knew the target would be 10 years later than that, around 2035. But it seems the Japanese government hadn't told him.
I can imagine this tough guy admiral, how irritated that must have made him when he found out that he hadn't been given the truth. But the next question is, do they really have a method for turning slime or mayonnaise into a firm seabed?
Well, sort of. What they say they have. They're going to use different methods, but they emphasize that they use this sand compaction pile method. So according to this method, you drill holes into the slime and pour in sand and pound it with pile drivers. So to solidify or obey that operation will have to be repeated 71,000 times, or 71,000 pile will be implanted, with each pile like 3 or 4 feet in diameter.
No, you must have gotten that number wrong. You must want to say 7,100 times, right?
No, 71,000 times.
71,000
Times.
sand piles.
Right. It's crazy.
Okay. Okay, if you say so. I guess it's the government that is actually saying so. It does sound crazy. Does it actually work?
Well, the government said it worked at the Kansai International Airport in the mainland Japan. But trouble is that Kansai International is famously sinking into the sea. The terminal building there is kept level with the hydraulic jacks, and that its tarmac is asphalt, so the cracks can be quickly smoothed over.
But planes do fly in and out of Kansai International, don't they?
Well, yes, yeah, they fly there, but Henoko's troubles never end. At present, okay, the technology for doing what they need to do doesn't just simply exist. Henoko's slime extends down to 300 feet below sea level, but the deepest any existing drill can go is 230 feet. So the best they can do is to make a somewhat hard layer down to 230 feet. Beneath that will be 70-foot layer of plain old slime. Whatever they do, the runway is going to sink, and it's going to sink unevenly, which means it's going to crack and warp. Not at all a safe place to fly airplanes.
How will that affect the runway then?
Well, according to the DoD regulations, runways, like all roads, needs to be graded so that the rainwater doesn't collect on them, but drains off to the sides. The slope all along the runway should be uniform, with the grade being around 1%. But if there are differences, aircraft speeding down it will sway dangerously from side to side. In the regulations, the rule that no grade change appears often.
This is in the rules published by the Department of Defense, right?
That's right.
No grade change.
No grade change, right. However, as you can see in this Japanese government documents here, the part of the runway that will be built over a bay will sink a little bit every year. The part built over solid ground will not sink. So this uneven setting will produce just a kind of a grade change that is forbidden in the DoD's regulations. That will endanger pilots, passengers, and the local residents as well.
Let's go back to the previous graphic, no, the next one. This is a little hard to understand. This is a cross section, as if the curved red line on the left-hand side is the tarmac seen as a cross section from the side, so that the rain will flow off on both directions. That's what they're talking about.
Right.
And it has to be exactly the same grade all the way up and down the airstrip. Otherwise,
the airplane will sway
back and forth. It'd be very dangerous.
Yeah.
And then the next one, I take it that each of those lines is how much it's going to sink.
That's right.
In 1 year.
Right, according to the this is a Japanese government's documents, so that means they admitted that ground will sink each year.
Yeah. So if it sinks, it's sure to crack and sure to be uneven. So it's a bad job.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, like, I'm not sure whether it's going to be really usable for military purposes.
Okay, and this leads to the obvious next question, which is, given that they're wildly behind schedule, at least a decade more, wildly over budget 3 times what they estimated, admitting that they're unable to build anything except a flawed product, and maybe not able to build one at all, why don't they quit?
That's a good question. That's what we want to know the answer for it too. A private builder would have quit long ago. But this is the Japanese government, and the government needs to save face. It's unbearable for the Japanese government to admit it, that they can give the U.S. what it asked for.
That they can't give the U.S.
They can't give the U.S. what it asked for.
Uh-huh.
And it is also unbearable for them to be seen as being defeated by the Okinawans. But also, even if the base is not completed, the companies still get paid. When the bubble bursts, no companies will go bankrupt. The Japanese taxpayers will pay. And many Japanese politicians have connections with those companies.
Connections mean that they make money from those companies.
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
and even some people believe that when it is finished, this airport is finished, construction is finished, the actual user will be the Japanese self-defense forces, not the U.S. military. So the question DOD and the U.S. Congress should ask is this: how long must they play along with this boondoggles if the point is to save the faces and line the pockets of their Japanese counterparts? So that's where we stand today. The shallow areas where the soil is firm are being filled. The deep areas are not. The Japanese government target is the mid-2030s. Others say the mid-40s if the sea bottom can be solidified. Never if it can't. The daily sitting at the gate of the Camp Schwab continues. And also kayak protesters are on the sea protesting against the constructions. And the protests are occasionally suspended because of the coronavirus pandemic. But with or without sitting or protest, the construction is not going well.
All right, and the last question is, what can people do in the U.S. that might be helpful to the Okinawans?
It's a great question, and I would say many things. Of course, we hope that you will pass on the information to the people you know, and you can contact your congresspersons to direct their attention to these issues. But also, I understand the Veterans for Peace ROCK is carrying out a more targeted campaign. Given this engineering problems, Veterans for Peace ROCK believes that U.S. can be persuaded that it's in the national interest to give this project up. There are some members of Congress who hold that view. If enough of them send a request to the General Accounting Office, the General Accounting Office will do investigations of the Henoko project, and all the problems will be brought to light. So, to that end, the Veterans for Peace ROCK, I think it wants to renew the letter writing campaign they began 2 years ago. So please watch for more information in the national VFP newsletters for details on how to generate letters. And finally, I just would like to express my sincere appreciations to the VFP's members and their support for a struggle against the Henoko-based constructions. And these photos says it all. This is the photo of our Veterans for Peace members coming to Okinawa. They participated in sitting in front of the Camp Schwab, hustled by the Japanese police. But this gave us encouragement to keep on our fight against the construction base.
This photograph was taken during the first delegation, the VFP delegation to Henoko. And if you look carefully, you folks will probably see people that you recognize. Oh yeah, there's Mike Haynes, and there's Tarak, and there's a lot of others that you know. That takes us to the end of the frequently asked questions. Now we'd like to turn to the questions that you folks have in your minds after listening to this. And Yoshikawa-san, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was
My name is Shimazaki DOKTOR. I'm one of the co-founders of Veterans for Peace, ROCK. That is the Ryukyus-Okinawa chapter, Kokusai, or international, as well as the VFP Hawai'i Ch chapter, 113, among other organizations. I was asked to help moderate this end portion, so bear with me as we get this going. First, I would like to, if I may, thank everyone that's come on here. And then in future, there should be a recording available. So this also goes out to those who are checking this out in another time. Like to acknowledge, also where I'm speaking from. I am speaking from Kapai Aino Hawai'i, of the Hawaiian nation that is currently occupied by the U.S. And its military, much like Ryukyu or Okinawa. If I could just introduce our panelists here who will take your questions, and a friendly reminder, if you have a question you would like the panelists to address, to please put it in the Q&A box. If you put it in the chat, please type it back in the Q&A if you want. Otherwise, we'll assume the questions in the chat are yundaku conversation. So if I may, on our panel today, we have MAKISHI Yoshikawa-san, or Max, very well-known, famous activist in Okinawa, and architect, and a member of this Okinawa peace movement, environmental movement for quite a long time. And he's joined up. And we also have and actually mute, if you could have the mute, perhaps. Okay, perhaps I'll just introduce everyone and we take the questions. Okay, next we have YONAHA Keiko sensei. He's a linguistic educator at Meio University in Okinawa and a member of the Japanese Association of Poets. Shout out to poets, playwrights, editors, and so forth. And we also have Yoshikawa Hideki, and also very well-known voice of for peace in Okinawa. He's an anthropologist and resident, and his hometown in Nago as well. He teaches currently at Meio University and Ryukyus University, and the international director of the Save the Dugong Campaign Center, director of the Okinawa Environmental Justice Project. Does a great blog for those following ecological issues on there. And probably should announce him first. You know, I did this wrong. I tried to do it by age. And that is, of course, Doug Loomis, former Marine, 68 and 71. And also one of the coordinator for the Veterans for Peace at Ryukyus chapter, and author of several books on this subject here. I'd like to stop talking so we can hear you folks address some of these questions, if I may. And the questions will just be open. If you feel you want to take it, take it. And if someone could please translate, onegaishimasu. So the first question I'm taking up, and this is in no particular order. Well, I'm sorry, it's in first come, first served order. That's what it is, okay. As someone in the US of North America, what are some actionable ways that we can support Okinawans? How can we turn up the heat? Thank you, Cheryl Harrison, for asking that. So again, what can people do? And I think this is specific to the US. They said North America, so Canadians, Mexicans too, I suppose. Pass that on to the panel. If someone could address the action we have at the end of this, or associated with this talk here.
Oh, and we're supposed to type the answer, huh?
No, please, it's on live, they can hear you. But actually there will be a link, so that will be posted in the chat of a couple ways that folks can help out. But if you want to tell them a little bit about that, Doug, please, or any of the other panelists, please.
Yes.
Is it a question to the people in the U.S. or to the people in Okinawa? You know, what
in
can
in the U.S.
Okay.
In North America.
I got it.
Let me give a brief answer, and we'll give a longer one maybe. First, there's a question prior to that that Pete skipped over. How's my dear friend Shimabukuro Fumiko? Shimabukuro Fumiko is the kind of patron mother of the sit-in at Nago, at Henoko. She's 90 years old. She has a special chair, and she is greatly respected by everyone. And I can tell you, she is just fine. She goes there at least every week, and is very much respected and very healthy, and 90 years old. What can you do to support Okinawa? One of the hopes of this, doing this webinar is to move to the next phase, as Pete said, of the letter writing campaign that we started 2 years ago. The thing is that the US government seems to be ignorant of what's going on in Okinawa. And there are many things that are not in their interest that are happening there. And the things that Yoshikawa-san described about the mayonnaise sea bottom, the cracking tarmac, the horrible environmental destruction, the violation of height limits, and the fact that it's going to take 10 years longer than they think it is. The thing is that if we tell the US government stuff like that, they won't believe it. It needs to be confirmed. And the best way to confirm it would be a GAO, Government Accountability Office, survey. The GAO, the Government Accountability Office, is attached to the US Congress. They will do an investigation if the Congress or some members of the Congress ask them to. Not if we ask them to, but if the Congress does. So people living in the US, if you write to your Congress representative and ask them, explain it and ask them to ask the GAO to do an investigation, the GAO is the most nonpartisan, fair branch that there is probably in the US government, other than maybe the post office. They're very, very good. And this could have a real effect. So we have prepared a letter to your congressman. The way it works is you put in your zip code and it automatically forwards letters to the Congress members representing that zip code. As you know, Congress people will not read or take seriously letters from anyone else except their constituents. So we're going to make this available to you. And if you can simply fill in the form, 3 letters will go out, your 2 senators and your representative. That's one thing you can do. Of course, all the other stuff, writing to other people, joining demonstrations, educating, all of that, of course, is very, very helpful. And it gives people in the US great energy. Pardon me, it gives people in Okinawa, people doing the sit-ins every day, great encouragement to know that there are folks in the US moving on this issue. Okay, that's too long an answer, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Doug. And I just, sorry to interrupt, but that link here you're mentioning to everyone is posted in the chat room. So I advise if you could click on that to take you to the place where with a few clicks, you can submit letters. Now, that is specific, yes, to those with the US citizenship, but I want to add something. I went online to try it myself and it didn't ask me for a zip code. So if you're outside of Okinawa, let's say you're an Okinawan citizen and you want to try to voice your voice, since it's your land, right? It's the Okinawan land it's being occupied by foreign militaries. That if you want to voice your concern as well as a person that's being personally impacted on that, by all means. But that was a question someone asked about specifically folks in the US. Before I respond with another example, does any other panelists want to mention other things folks can do?
Maki-san, 質問は I'm going to translate for Maki-san who needs an interpreter. 質問はアメリカ沖縄以外の人は連帯するためにどういう活動をすればいいんですかという質問。僕はその手紙の話をしたんだけれども、他に
Dougさん Yeah. The first question that I asked was, is this question is for the people in Okinawa or is for the people in the United States? That what I mean, what I meant was, is this question is asked to the people in the US or Okinawan? That was my first question. But you people said, it is a question to other people in the US. So I didn't translate it. because it is not the question toward the Okinawan people. But Doug-san, now you are asking to Makishi-san, Okinawan, that question. So I just wonder, you know.
Well, if I could jump in here, because I just got asked to moderate. Yeah, let's maybe there's other questions Makishi-san could address. And by the way, again, everyone, including Doug, I am just looking at questions in the question and answer dialogue. So another action that folks can take, because people just want to know, what can we do to help Okinawa? And most of the people listening are outside Okinawa, you know, and listening in English language. So there is, I'll keep this short, February 23rd, the Berkeley City Council will be hearing a resolution in support of Henoko. And there should be a website link that's up, will be posted, if not already soon, that similar to the other action, folks can click on it and it'll take you to a letter writing model of which you can modify or simply click and send. And that one, while it's highly encouraged folks in the Bay Area and Berkeley, those are the folks that really need to take action on it the most as constituents. I would add that it is possible for folks outside of Berkeley, and that includes folks in Okinawa, if they want to write as well their feelings about why other cities like Berkeley should support the people of Okinawa.
マキさん、今の話分かりましたか？バークレー市で、辺野古を支持する決議がなされましたよね。はい。そういうような決議が、どんどんカリフォルニア、バークレー市以外のですね、海岸、ところでね、なされれば、これはかなりいい力になるんじゃないかという話をちょっと今してます。はい。
Okay, so if I could take
マキさんの声は今聞こえないんですので、ミュートになってて聞こえませんけど、はい、何か言いたいことが。はい。
じゃあ僕の方から、アメリカの人々、特に軍隊への人々にとって沖縄はキーストーン・オブ・ザ・パシフィックと呼んでいます。で、僕たち沖縄の僕なんかはキーストーン・オブ・ピースになりたいんですよ。
Even though the U.S. military people call Okinawa a keystone of Pacific, in Pacific. However, we Okinawan would like to be a keystone of peace. Did you hear? Can you hear?
Yes, yes.
Keiko-san? Okay, that's what he said.
Okay. 第二次世界大戦で沖縄は戦場になりました。その戦場の経験を持っているので、殺し合うためのキーストーンではなくて、平和のためのキーストーンになりたいと切に願っています。
We Okinawan and to be our keystone of peace, not a keystone to kill each other. Since we already experienced the civil Okinawan War. Did you hear?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know if I could jump in here because we have like limited time and we have a lot of questions. So I don't think it's the intention that every single panelist is going to be able to respond to every single question. So like I said, I just like...
どんどん質問に行きましょうね。時間がないですので。
Right. So in fact, I might have to... so let me get to the questions. So next question is, do you find connections with Japan anti-pollution civil movements like Minamata disease related movement?
For this question, is it okay to answer from me?
Sure, of course.
Because, Minamata problem is different from this kind of, anti-war. Because that is a pollution problem caused by the, factory industrialization, So different kind of, environmental problem. However, we can connect to the other organization, US-based or, SDF-based related, contamination of the environment. that kind of, anti-military base group, which also oppose the environmental destruction. That kind of group we can connect with. So we should, I think, MAKISHI know this kind of organization. I don't know, but.
Well, if I could add to that, I used to live in Kumamoto briefly, and where Minamata happened. And for those who don't know, it was an industrial, it was one of the, known as one of the first industrial diseases, from industrial pollution. And where it's different is that, mentioned as an environmental movement, the relationship to the movement is just caring for the environment, which, one does not have to be there for care about that environment. For example, I don't live in Antarctica, but I could still care about it. It still affects all of us. But how it's different, how YONAHA sensei put it is, it's political. The pollution situation in Okinawa is completely optional. It's unnecessary because it's strictly a political source of pollution. That is the military bases. Whereas in Minamata, it was a commercial industrial plant, that makes products for profit, which is, it has an economic and an industrial concern versus a political one.
Thank you very much for clarification.
If I could jump to, I don't know how many questions, and maybe I need to check in with the host, the web host here, is how much time do we have to do this? If I could ask. Okay, we'll just keep going until I get it.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. Y'all were scheduled till 6:30, but I think you could go on for as long as you all want to.
Okay, well, maybe if we could, in consideration of folks watching, try to keep them briefer than longer. The next question, how does Japanese Defense Forces play into the continued destruction and or future use of the base? What perceived value does this have for them? So this is a question about the self-defense forces and their future use of the bases. Excellent question. I'd like to pass, take it.
今の質問は、自衛隊がですね、将来どのようにこの米軍基地を使っていくのかという、この自衛隊に関する問題ですね、質問ですね。どれぐらい自衛隊がその問題に関与しているかとかですね。
先ほど言いましたけれども、沖縄を軍隊のキーストーンにするんじゃなくて、平和のためのキーストーンにしていく。国同士が喧嘩をするのではなくて、平和のための活動をする。そういうふうな活動を国と国との間でやっていけば、自衛隊という人を殺すための訓練をする必要はないし、そういう組織を作る必要もないと思います。
これ今の質問はですね、特に自衛隊に焦点を当ててるんですね。先ほど辺野古が自衛隊と米軍と共同して使うということももう合意されたということも発表されてますし、これからの自衛隊の軍事に関する関与というか、沖縄の基地の自衛隊との共同使用についての問題ですね。どういうふうに
共同使用という共に使うというのを軍隊人殺しをするための共同使用ではなくて、国と国が仲良くするための共同使用、そうなってほしいと切に思います。
He wishes it should be not for the cooperation, for the military action, but for the peace action. I mean the cooperation of U.S. military and SDF. It should move toward the kind of, peace, direction to the peace, not towards a military action together.
Pito, わかりましたか?
However, we found that, there was agreement between Japanese government and U.S. government that they are going to use I mean the Japanese, I mean the SDF and US military are going to use the Henoko military base together. And I think, mainly the focus is shifting to the use of SDF now. That's why Japanese government is so earnest to keep on going, that's kind of, construction, regardless of mayonnaise type of, soil.
Great. Maybe we can do this too, as maybe limit the number of people who respond to the question so we get a chance to all the questions. So next question I have up. So this is a question about the opinion of Yamatunchu, the Japanese nationals, on their opinion and what percentage oppose the presence of U.S. bases. If maybe someone who hasn't spoken want to address that?
はい。これ本土の人からの質問ですけども、何%の人が今、米軍基地に反対してますか？
およそ 70% 以上です。
Yeah, more than 70%, roughly.
Okay, just to be clear, the question was not about Uchinanchu, Okinawans. The question was about Yamatunchu.
Sorry.
Have,
not
okay,
from Yamatunchu, to the people in Yamatunchu. Okay, for the I mean, what percent of Yamatunchu people are against the U.S. military base?
Correct, and maybe for the viewers that aren't clear, this question could be confusing if you don't have this back knowledge that Okinawans are indigenous people and Japanese are a newer settler.
日本の何%の人たちが米軍基地に反対してますかって。Are you kind of mentioning, U.S. military base, especially in Okinawa or in all Japan?
The question didn't specify.
So it means, what percentage of, mainlanders are against the U.S. military base? Not specified in Okinawa, but all the U.S. military base, right?
In general, I suppose.
In general, okay. 特に沖縄に限らずですね、アメリカ軍基地に対して何%の本土の人たちが反対してますか？これ、秀樹さんでもいいんじゃないですか？吉川さん、でもいいですし、牧さん。はい、吉川さんいきます。はい。
Okay. Thank you for the question. This is a great question. I think there is like a consensus on the mainland Japanese, on the part of the mainland Japanese. They support the U.S.-Japan's alliance, this agreement. But at the same time, these people in mainland Japanese, the people in mainland Japan, they don't really have their own experiences of having military bases on their backyard. So it's really hard for them. I mean, from my Okinawan's perspective, it's really hard for them to form any kinds of opinions about the realistic opinions about the presence of military bases. So that's my kind of take. But again, many people, actually majority supports according to the newspaper opinion polls, the majority supports the U.S.-Japan alliances. Okay. But
so
I think it's really different from the having.
Cannot tell the percentage, but majority means more than 50 or 60.
According to the mainland newspapers.
According to his opinion.
Yeah, opinion polls.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to come in with the next question and just try to get the most for everyone. So this one has some background on it. Let me see if I can just tease out the question. It has to do about, oh, okay, sorry, I thought it was about the self-defense force space. Okay, I see it. Sorry, if folks could put their questions like concisely. Okay, the question is about, sorry, there's like a couple different points here. Okay, the question is about, I don't say rumors, but comments coming out of the strategic and international studies that suggest that Henoko will not be finished as planned. So you know, according to the timetable that Japan keeps propagating to everyone, including the U.S. and the military. So could someone take that question about this? I know Doug, maybe Doug or someone else could talk about this on the U.S. end about concerns that actually the base not actually come together in time.
マキシさん、今の質問は、辺野古はもう完成されないんじゃないかというような話をよく聞きますが、それについてどうですかってことで、ダグさんに聞いてます。はい。I translated. Okay. Go, please.
Yeah, there's, as we said in the video, there are things against the U.S. interest going on in Henoko as well. It isn't just a question of sympathy for the Okinawans, that you try to take that to the U.S. government and then it has no effect. But the fact that the thing has been delayed, the fact that it's going to be a flawed piece of construction, if it gets done at all, the fact that it's going to be dangerous because it violates height limits, things like that. Plus, I think the thing that bothers them the most is that they're 20 years behind, and it looks like they're going to be another 15 years before they get it done, if they can get it done at all, and it's not clear that they can. At some point, a rational government planner thinking of the interest of the Department of Defense is going to say, to hell with this. We give it up. This is not going to work. That can really happen. And interestingly, I go to the sit-in about once a week. Now that we have COVID, it's sort of not gathering, but before that and after COVID calms down after that, there's a sit-in every day, 5 days a week. And I go about once a week, and you'd be amazed how optimistic the sit-in people are. People who look at the thing from afar often say, oh, poor Okinawa is going to lose. You can't win against the US and Japan combined. But the people in the sit-in who are actually going there, some of them every day, are the most optimistic people you'll meet on this earth. They're absolutely certain that this base will never get done. And there are some voices inside the US government, inside the Congress, and inside among government advisors who agree with that, who are beginning to understand it can't be done. It's a crazy boondoggle, and it's rational planning to give it up and find something else. So people are optimistic.
Thank you, Doug. You actually addressed a couple questions there. Oh, I'm sorry, Hideki-san, dozo.
Yeah, just I want to add a little bit. So this CSIS report, that was very good report. And I hope this is the beginning. It's a sign that governments and also think tanks now realizing, as Doug talked about, this project is almost impossible. It will take forever, even if they want to complete. So, and it takes like 10 more years, 20 more years. I don't think it can be considered as a sort of a strategic project, even from a military standpoint, even from the military standpoint of view.
Thank you. And I will go on to the next question. There was a comment too that I think it's informative to the panel as well and to myself. It's my understanding, Colleen, if you could confirm that, or actually the ROCK team, that this will have subtitles in Japanese later. Did I understand or misunderstand that?
Yes, it'll have subtitles later.
Okay, so for that matter, then someone asked about the amount of Japanese happening in this presentation. If maybe we can not silence those voices per se, but minimize them, because there will be some more translation added, honyaku, later. So to keep that in mind, because I don't know we'll be able to translate every single thing here. And I want to do justice to some of these questions and people's time out there. So thanks for everyone's patience. And again, a reminder for the last questions that there is an action folks can take, the letter campaign. So check the chat for that. And to anyone that may have lost hope that there's any chance of any changes, just a friendly reminder that it was in the last Defense Authorization Act that there was finally, for the first time in record in US government, that acknowledged that there was, quote, environmental and humanitarian issues in Okinawa. And that's the first time ever the US government has acknowledged these issues, because up until then, it's always been like, it's a Okinawa, it's a domestic problem. Japan just keeps telling us how to feel on it. And now, because of people's asking questions, putting pressure on US representatives, this is in fact having some impact. So the next question, again, I don't want to do any favoritism, so I'll just go in order here, is a general broader question about the Okinawan peace movement. Because it's, as folks know here, it's been going on for decades. US occupation, 75 years old, and Japanese occupied in 1870s. So the question is, how has the movement changed over time? For example, with international support, Japanese government attitudes, Japanese general public. I guess some of this question has been addressed, but maybe what are some of the biggest challenges? I'll leave that on that question, because this question, some of the panelists have already been answering about in terms of the spirit, the unbreakable spirit in Okinawa and so forth. So perhaps if anyone wants to talk about any big challenges right now.
はい、牧師さんいませんね。
はいはい。
はい。
はい。
で、今の問題はですね、沖縄の、反基地運動の変化、例えば国際社会のサポートなりですね、日本政府の姿勢なりですね、今沖縄が直面している最大の問題は何ですかということですね。こういう反戦、あるいは反基地運動に関して。
沖縄と沖縄に置いているアメリカ政府、そのアメリカ政府に直接沖縄の声を届ける、そういうルートを作らなきゃいけないと思います。
The problem that he think is how to find the route to send our Okinawans' voice to the U.S. government directly. We are struggling to find a way to send our voice to the U.S. people, to the U.S. government directly, not through the Japanese government.
辺野古のことで言いますと、辺野古の地盤がマヨネーズのようなふにゃふにゃした地盤なので、滑走路が凸凹になります。滑走路が凸凹になるということは、アメリカの若いパイロットたちの命の危険につながります。そういうことを直接アメリカの皆さんに伝えたい。
Yeah. We'd like to directly appeal how dangerous, runaway will be with that fragile soil. It's threatened the people and U.S. military soldiers, people's life, with that kind of, unsafe Henoko base runaway, especially. If it was built, over the fragile soil, it threatened the U.S. people's lives. We should kind of, appeal that to the people in the U.S. too.
で今回のようなこの VFP のウェビナーのような機会をもっともっとたくさん作って直接アメリカの国民に訴えるようなこともできたらいいなと思います。
I wish, with such kind of action like webinar, through that kind of, project, we'd like to send our voice directly to the people in the United States. by increasing the chances of this kind of meeting, webinar.
Thank you. I having to jump in because I'm being notified. We're gonna try to wrap up in the next 10 minutes, okay? So I'm sorry, we're not gonna be able to get to all the questions, but let's try to get to some of them. And if I could, in the interest of time, address this next question, keep it short, and then respond because yeah, I don't think I'm gonna be saying much beyond this. So the question is, in summary, is a question about, is Shimanchu, Ryukyuan, Ryuchu sovereignty, independence required to address this issue? And if I may, in the interest of time, I'll say a couple things about that, maybe more than a couple things. So the situation in Okinawa is there is a small, somewhere no more than 15%, that's a very high number of folks that in Okinawa that independence, sovereignty, restoring that, restoration of the Ryukyu Kingdom nation as needed to address these situations. That's understandable. Look at the crisis over the Senkaku Islands between China, Japan, and now the US military. Had this been, as it originally was, sovereign territory to Ryukyu, which maintained a non-military policy in terms of conducting its foreign affairs, perhaps we wouldn't have this struggle going on. But, you know, the thing is, the person asked about this, right now, the majority of people of Shimanchu Okinawans are not focused on independence at this time. And it's, for those of us outside Okinawa, that's a decision for the Okinawa people living in Okinawa to decide for themselves. As for it, is that the only strategy? That's a great question. But we have evidence of other places from Puerto Rico, for example, of other regions that keep this short, that have successfully demilitarized and decolonized all around the world, you know, the former colonies. So we know that's possible. Yeah. I had a few more things to say, but I'll just, like, in the interest of time, go to another question.
It is true that, you know, during the reversion, before the reversion to Japan, Okinawan people were eager to return to Japan because they suffered enough under the US occupation. However, now, when we look at the, you know, reality, our voice as Okinawan cannot get through to Japanese government, and they ignore our human right. Even though we asked for our human right realization through the peace, you know, constitution, we believe that, you know, by returning to Japan, we can enjoy that, you know, peace constitution. Under that constitution, our human rights will be kind of, you know, secured. However, there is a kind of severe situation we have now. So I can understand that, you know, the, you know, independent movement is getting kind of, you know, what can I say? You know, their voice was kind of getting to be accepted. However, still, majority of Okinawan people think it's not realistic. Financially and geopolitically, I think they are thinking that way. Even though in our spirit, in our Okinawan spirit, we're eager to have it independence from Japan. However, the realistic situation, it may be difficult. I think, you know, that's a kind of, you know, way of thinking of Okinawan people right now. What do you think about it? Dagi-san and Hideki-san and Maki-san?
Before answering that, I see over here on the chat side a good question from Dan Brody. Can we save these questions and answer them, send answers to people later? Because we're not going to be able to get through. I see that there's 29 questions under the Q&A and we've only done a few. Is it possible to save these questions and write up some answers and send them out to everybody. Is that technologically possible? I think it should be.
Ali?
Yes, I'm grabbing them all now for you all.
Great. So that's our
Sounds
next
good.
project. We got to answer these questions that we triggered.
Yeah. With the few the minutes that we have, does anyone feel compelled to respond, or should we go on? Anyone? Okay. In that case, since it sounds like there'll be an effort to follow up the other questions, we'll see if we can get maybe a couple more in there before we wrap up for just now. Ooh, that's in Japanese. There's one question: what kinds of coalitions exist between Okinawans and other anti-base movements in Hawaii, Guam, Jeju, etc.? It's about international solidarity.
ハワイとかグアムとか他の反基地をしているグループとの連帯はどうなんですかという質問でした。
Okay, Hideki, I can give my answers to that questions. Well, it's been great. I think we have getting a great support and great collaborations with organizations in the U.S. Yeah, VFP, of course. And we have our environmental organizations. We actually filed, MAKISHI and others filed lawsuits in the U.S. Court, with the help of the U.S. environmental organizations. And also we have very good connections with the anti-base movement in Jeju. And I myself was able to go there once, and I also had a meeting or conference together with the people from the Jeju. So there's lots of very exciting collaborations going on, but we need more for sure.
And I also would like to add that, Okinawan people in Hawaii are also very supportive to anti-U.S. military base, movement, and included other problems in Okinawa.
Thank you. I had to make a quick correction. Someone corrected me in saying that Puerto Rico is still colonized. I absolutely agree. I was referring more to Ryukyus and some of that brave work those folks did there to stop some of the bombing over there. And in fact, came to Okinawa. I get to meet them there in solidarity. I don't know if we can probably maybe take one more question. Wanted to kind of also address a point that hasn't been so addressed when the questions come up around Okinawa, and it is the issue of security. And that's often the word that those that enable and make apologies for the base concentration in Okinawa, they use this word security. So I want to address that because Okinawa has the same concern. The difference is we're talking about security, we're talking human security, not national security. The difference is, of course, human security is just preserving life. Nuchidu takara, it's a strong Okinawan value. But national security is an economic, it's a political definition of security. It's not a matter of not only is the US government not listening to Okinawans, it's not listening to its own citizens, African Americans, transgender folks, and other folks that have been facing a lot of oppression in their own country as citizens. So as we love it, what happens domestically is happening internationally. As people know, there's a lot of concerns now with China. And I think it's important to look at this context in terms of what would be true security for Okinawa. War hasn't been security. It's led to killing almost a third of its people, and it continues to poison the people of Okinawa. The narrative about this competition around Senkaku and Okinawa is a narrative that's constructed by bigger empires. It's not a narrative constructed from Okinawa, because those that know the history know that Okinawa was sovereign, independent, and was able to expand its economic trade and well-being through its relationships with other countries and not dependent on a standing military to provide its security. Of course, that changed when Japan and then later United States colonized and militarized it. You know, the thing is, historically, China recognized, and Okinawa did have a recognition. Now, Hideki-san and I might disagree on this. I'm not totally crazy about the Chinese government, in particular its human rights record, you know, Tibet, Uyghur folks, and even its treatment of its own workers, for that matter, in the environment. But, you know, I have to recognize that the Chinese are already in Okinawa, or at least they were prior to the pandemic. There are so many Chinese tourists in Okinawa, shopping, buying everything on site, right? And that was, I would say, providing more security, like in terms of relationships between countries, than pointing weapons at each other. And because in the end, war is not a long-term strategy or solution. We can look at the military occupation in Korea. Has that brought peace to the border? No, the standing military has only continued military tensions for decades. It has not resolved the problem. And we know that now because we have missiles firing over Japan and aimed at Hawaii and so forth. The other thing I want to just put in a context is some folks may know that recently, days ago, there was yet another incident where a Marine has been, the charge is indecent assault against a local civilian. And my question to those folks that support military bases is, how many Okinawans have been mugged, raped, harmed in some criminal way by Chinese soldiers or Russian soldiers, etc.? The answer is none, you know, but if you ask how many have been either personally threatened or poisoned or threatened by falling aircraft parts, like on the schools in Futema, how, you know, that's happening every day, and that threat is there every day. And so when people are measuring out how do we bring security, we have to look at the state of insecurity that Okinawans have been living now for decades. So sorry for speaking a little bit more, but that's just trying to address some of these other questions here in the column that we're not going to get to all of them. But again, we are going to make sure that this is available again for viewing, and we'll see about answering some of those questions. And before folks leave, make sure that you have the information about the two actions. That's one at Veterans for Peace, the letter writing campaign that Veterans for Peace and ROCK chapters are coordinating together, as well as the one for Berkeley City Council. If you could do that before February 22nd, I think 222, as a deadline to get those letters in. Before, you know, it looks like we better wrap up. So I apologize, and we knew that was going to happen before. So maybe it would be best to just give the panelists an opportunity, if they have, feel compelled to share anything, to do so now before we wrap up here.
Okay, so I go first then, okay? So just responding to what you said, Pete, I think the big question we have is that what kind of East Asia, or what kind of the region we want to live in. So I know I want to live in, as Okinawan, region, Asia, where they're based upon the principles of democracy, human rights, protection of human rights, rule of law, and justice. And our movements against the Henoko-based construction is it's all our democratic voice and the protection of human rights. And we are calling for justice. And these are very, very important issues. So that I think that this region, that include China, North Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Russia, these regions, I think, should be built upon the principle of democracy, human rights, and justice, and rule of law. That's, and we're trying to, we're struggling for. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned about two different kind of security, national one and kind of people side, right? And the issue now on debate tended to be just focus on the security of kind of national security. And from this kind of view, even from this kind of view, I doubt if, China is a really threat to Japan and Okinawa. We should kind of, study it if it's really threat. Because, all the time, the enemy of Japan was defined by US government. Before, it was Russia. And now it turned to be China. It's always related with the interest of US government. We doubt if China is really want to have a war with that great power of the United States. Even though it's on the development, economical development now, it's a distraction for them. And, the missile launch from North Korea, is it really a threat to Japan? I doubt it either. I doubt it too. So we should kind of, look into this kind of issue if it's really a threat. That threat, where it is coming from, we should seek it. We should seek for it. Study it carefully.
We'll find that the only countries that ever really invaded Ryukyu was Japan and the United States. Would someone else like to share? We got Doug and Makishi-san, if some closing thoughts.
Just to follow up on what Yoshikawa-san and YONAHA-san said, you can look at it this way. China has intercontinental missiles. We can be sure that those missiles have various programs, computer programs, to send them to different places. We can be sure that there is a program to send intercontinental missiles to Okinawa. If there isn't, the person in charge of those missiles should be fired. That's his job to do that. That's what they're for. But think, what would be the reason what would motivate China to send missiles to Okinawa? If you look at the program carefully, you will surely find that they're programmed to strike Kadena Air Base and Phtemma Air Base and Camp Hansen and Camp Schwab, etc. The only reason for sending those missiles to Okinawa would be to destroy the US bases there. So what is there about those bases that makes residents in Okinawa feel safe?
It doesn't.
I don't feel safe at all. Every time the tensions go up, I remember that depending on the wind and the weather, where those missiles actually land might be on top of the house I'm sitting in right now. It's clear and present danger because of the bases. So without ever giving up the idea of world peace or regional peace, there's a smaller immediate goal, which is just, if as soon as possible, get those bases out of here. and then let's talk about world peace.
Yeah, I think, we should think about who is really offensive and who is really defensive in the world.
Yeah.
Well, on that note of what you said, Doug, about moving on, we're hitting the, I guess it's the 2-hour mark. So we really should wind down here. I don't know if you have Makishi-san say last words, or he probably answered the most questions. I don't know. What do you guys think? Maki-san, any thoughts?
何かありますか？おっしゃりたいこと。
最後の。
はい。まあ、先ほど安全保障の問題をお話してましたけど、国の安全保障と、それから人の安全保障と、沖縄ではぬと宝というふうに人の安全保障が強調されてるんですけども、アメリカの方では国の安全保障ということで、沖縄に基地が置かれてるわけですね。
沖縄は琉球という国でありました。小さな国であるけれども、大きな国の中国とお互いの権利を保障するような対等の関係を結んでいました。そういう対等な関係を軍事力によらずに対等な関係を持つ、お互いの国の考えを尊重するという、そういう風。
And on behalf of VFP-ROCK, we're incredibly grateful for everyone's caring and just solidarity